the role. Hello, I'm Liz Lembke, and I'm excited to be talking to you today on the fourth day of our Career Growth Summit, where it's about social learning. And I'm going to be talking to specifically the aspect of what is the role of belonging. So we know that we as humans are social creatures. So what does it mean when we're working remotely and being connected? And how does this play into our sense of who we are and who we get to cooperate with? So let's dive in. So first question, all right, how does a duck swim? All right, so yes, okay, yes, I did study at the University of Oregon, but this is actually a really relevant question. How does a duck swim? You see it gliding along the surface of the water and it seems so elegant, but if you look underneath the surface, you see that it's paddling furiously. And this is an aspect that as we look to the role of belonging and we look to the role of loneliness and how we're doing, everything seems to be going a-okay. Everything seems to be from the outside great. But if you look underneath the surface, oftentimes what you will see is that many of us are really swimming quite furiously just to keep our heads afloat. And so this is why when we're talking about social learning, I really am happy to be talking to you about this. What is the role of belonging? And I am your Chief Talent Navigator and also your guide to working remotely, being connected. So I am Liz Lembke. I am the Chief Talent Navigator at Transforming Talent. And I also, for L&D Cares, head up all of our career growth stream activities, which includes, of course, the Career Growth Summit. And I have, like you, been learning so much this week and so impressed about the beauty that it is when all these volunteers come together to really say, what can we do to co-create a better path forward when it comes to career growth? My background, I'll just say 15 plus years within HR. And yeah, what do I love? I love 80s references. I love gifts, and I love seeing people build their own confidence in their own competence. And that's definitely why I do what I do. So with that, let's dive in. So at the beginning of this pandemic, seems like forever and a half, maybe a century ago, of March 2020, I took, some time out to really kind of think, okay, what is the thought model? What are those different aspects that we were being confronted with? Because we're working remotely, but we're working remotely during a pandemic, which is very different than normal dispersed work teams. This is an additional stress, obviously, on where we are and where we're going. And so there are different petals or different aspects which really crystallize themselves out of this aspect of how do I look at myself and lead myself before I look to leading others. And the 5 core areas of the working remotely, being connected, that really come into focus are: uncertainty is our reality, that there's an all freshmen feeling. We're all in the same boat, we're all in the same storm, albeit in different boats. Health and viability and vitality, our relationships, our motivation, and then here at the top really truly is this aspect of what is the role of belonging. And so as we go through this, and we're really going to dive into this aspect of role of belonging in terms of what does it mean for you, what does it mean for me, and what does it mean for us? So key question, all right, here in the chat. Are the number of connections representative of a sense of belonging? All right, wait, no. Wow, good job, you guys. So here, yeah, absolutely correct. So some of it's been said that our generation Z and beyond the millennials really are the loneliest generations. The 2000ers and now the generation Corona, unfortunately, it's being called. So these are some of the loneliest generations ever to be, even though if you look at like the Instagrams, if you look at the other social media in terms of followers and in terms of here, the sheer number of connections, it's quite a few. But this aspect of how do you feel alone on an island, perhaps even ostracized if you have a different opinion, etc. This really plays out in terms of how people are feeling connected or as this case may be, disconnected. So, all right, now I'm going to ask you to go back on a little bit of a time, go do the time warp again with me. So if you guys remember back, so what was weird in March 2020 when it came to structuring your day while you were working remote? So this was a big cut. So between February and March, many of us left the office and tried to figure out, how do we work from home? And one of those strange things, yes, exactly. So I had to figure out when my lunchtime was. It's so true. And it was so funny. So these small little rituals, like my colleagues come and they pick me up at my desk, or we say, okay, hey, it's quarter till. What are they having in the cafeteria? What's going on? Can we go for a walk after lunch? All of those little rituals around our day, around our connections with our colleagues, really fostering that team cohesion of, meeting up at the water cooler, as the joke was from 9 to 5, to now, saying, okay, how are we meeting up within a chat room or after a Zoom call when they're exhausted? So this was a real challenge, and this was very strange, is to say, okay, now how do I have autonomy over how I structure my day on the one hand, because I don't have that commute. On the other hand, I'm trying to juggle my kids' schedules, my partner's schedules, and somehow figure out, how do I keep and maintain some energy during this craziness? So one of the strangest aspects, you guys got it exactly right, was this aspect around, how do I structure my day? And this really brought to a head, and I can imagine that as we look towards September, et cetera, when hopefully some the vaccines have gotten a little bit more broad, where we consider, how do we go back? I think, here probably in September, there will be a lot more discussions around, how do we regain what we've lost over the last couple of months when it comes to working remotely and returning into the office. But let's stay here in February and think, what aspects do we miss about the office? Okay, so what do you miss? The spontaneous discussions, just being check-in, not having to make those one-on-one discussions in a call specifically. Yeah. So this, I don't know what we call it, the osmosis of it's being around you, and that sense of others being there. I know for me, when I became independent, it was one of the hardest things to do. I love working when other people around me are working. It makes it easier for me to get down and buckle down. So this is that aspect, here there's some things really truly about just some of those spontaneous, but also those connections of being in the room and being together with others. Interesting. Okay. Yes. Having the time for the commute to get phone calls done, and then being able to start today. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. So that goes back into that aspect of how are we structuring our days. So, why? So here, as we think about what are those things that we disconnect? What are some of those reasons? Well, this is interesting, and so to that point, when preparing for this talk, I was looking at some of the literature review around how are teleworkers? What are some of those aspects around loneliness, around being a sense of a team, that are really missing. And so Susan Ashford, she brought out that many scholars and researchers have documented the feelings of isolation experienced by teleworkers, and have found that the experience can lead to significantly more negative emotions such as loneliness, irritability, worry, and guilt. All right, so why is this? Why do you think? Okay, so this is really, and again, so Susan Ashford and this literature review, this was pre-COVID, okay? So this is really about telework. And again, I preface this at the beginning of the talk, that telework during a pandemic is different than normal telework, but it's still very applicable around what are those negative emotions around loneliness, irritability, worry, and guilt, is you don't feel like you're locked in. Those spontaneous discussions that you would have at the water cooler or et cetera, they don't happen. So it's quite often very task-oriented. We've heard from some of our folks in the L&D cares, it feels very transactional. asking where is the compassion. And so that's one of the reasons why we're here, is to say, okay, how do we foster those connections? We like to say social connection in social isolation is really key to being able to combat some of these negative emotions, feelings, etc., which are exacerbated when we are in that situation when we're looking for a new job in the midst of a pandemic. Looking for a new job, even though we want it to be enriching, filling, etc., is oftentimes very grating on one's own psyche in terms of, can I do it? What are my skills and competencies? I was always together with a team. So having those aspects really fall away, it really it makes the situation oftentimes even more challenging than simple telework. It's how do I find a job within a pandemic, etc., which makes it very hard at times to get up that energy to keep going, which is why, for us, one of the key aspects is how do we offer coaching? How do we offer opportunities for people, etc.? Because that connection and that feeling is so important in order to be able to combat some of these feelings of loneliness, guilt, and worry. This was interesting, and this came out back in April and May of 2020, so essentially almost a year ago. And it was really that piece to ask ourselves as we look to how are we feeling in terms of our emotional index. And this was the aspect of a global survey done by McKinsey in terms of how are people feeling. So in terms of acceptance, okay, understanding, all right, here COVID is at our doors. We need to figure out something to do. At the same time, very seemingly equal weighted together with apprehension. Coming in strongly behind that is pensiveness. There's a higher degree of interest as well as annoyance, and also a higher degree of anticipation. So what is coming at us? How do we approach it? So those aspects around joy, trust, disgust, and anger, those were smaller, as well as boredom was definitely not high ranking on this list. But truly those aspects of acceptance, apprehension, and anticipation were certainly in the foreground as to what does this mean for us and how are we going to progress. Now that we're in February 2021, it would be interesting to see. I haven't seen the recent research as to how have these bubbles, how have they varied, how have they changed. I can imagine that those aspects around serenity, surprise, but also perhaps some interest, that those are changing as we're really learning to see, okay, what are some of those aspects that we hadn't considered before around in April and May. Okay, so moving on. So again, this talk that we're doing today is really about belonging. And this sense of belonging is this piece of I'm accepted in terms of who I am. And there are 4 R's that I like to talk about when it comes to belonging. It's respect, responsibility, relationship, and recognition. And these are absolutely key. I don't care if you are a first-time leader, if you are an intern in HR, if you are learning about people interaction for the first time today. These are really critical and crucial when it comes to that sense of being seen. Because at the end of the day, this is what, when we're talking about belonging, it's that sense of I'm being seen and heard and I have a place here. So the 4 pieces that really underscore that are these aspects of respect, responsibility, relationships, and recognition. So let's dive in. So again, what is belonging? So Culture Amp, and personally, I'm a huge fangirl of Culture Amp. I think they do some great work, particularly with wonderful resources. And I took this from their series on creating a sense of belonging. So, and what they say is belonging is the feeling of security and support when there is a sense of acceptance, inclusion, and identity for a certain member group or place. And really, truly, it is the fundamental basic fundamental drive to form and maintain lasting, positive, and significant relationships with others. And at the workplace, these relationships can be extended to the organization, its values, and to the work itself. So this is when we say, a sense of belonging to an organization. And you'll see I'm purposely avoiding the term culture fit. I hate it. So here, why do I hate it? Short aside, because culture fit reminds me of a straitjacket, so everyone the same. So when we're talking about belonging, it's more on that aspect of belonging like you belong in a family. So, maybe you don't even always get along with Uncle John. You guys are still in the same family. So in terms of culture fit, you really have to fit into that corset, rather than saying, okay, values fit, impact that you have to move forward, et cetera, and that the cultural values, they resonate with who you are. That's a completely different aside, coming back to the theme, right? So belonging really is that aspect about how do we feel within the organizations and the values that represents and the work that we get to do. So, and now when we're moving forward, social belonging, and at the beginning of this talk, I was talking about humans being social creatures, and it's absolutely true. So social belonging is a fundamental human need. It's actually hardwired into our DNA. And yet, okay, this is again pre-COVID, 40% of people say that they feel isolated at work, and the result has been lower organizational commitment and engagement. Okay, so this was from the research that was published 2019 in HBR about the value of belonging at work. And so there's a really good framework for belonging, and this was in a more recent Josh Bearson, also definitely follow him if you're into HR, around how can we help people kind of with that understanding of what is belonging and how do we view it within this framework. So 4 quadrants, we love those in HR. So the first one is the low belongingness and high belongingness, and on the other side, uniqueness is valued and sameness is valued. So if we look to the first square in terms of green, where it says differentiation, it's that aspect of uniqueness is valued, but there's a low sense of belonging. So here I feel different and I feel uncomfortable. Okay, so here maybe it's when we were talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. Here we got a response from some of our employee relationship groups that they felt like, okay, am I truly here about what I can have in terms of an impact? Or am I here because I represent something that the organization needs in order to have a compliance? Okay, so this is really important. This is that aspect of I'm different, but I don't belong. Okay, so that's that green aspect. The lower belongingness, and this where the sameness is valued. So this is, when I was talking just recently about culture fit being a corset, this is what I'm talking about, okay? So if sameness is highly valued in the organization and you are different, then you are excluded. So it's this aspect of I do not belong and I do not feel welcome. So this is you come in and you feel it immediately when you made a major faux pas or have a very different opinion than maybe the hippo opinion. Like my friend Mandy Choi likes to say, the highest paid person's opinion is the hippo opinion. Okay, so moving on, when we're looking at those aspects of sameness is valued and there's a high degree of belongingness, this is when a simulation, I'm saying in the lower quadrant, whereas I can fit in, but at the same time I have to be guarded. So this is when we're talking about code switching, this is where it's that piece of a simulation of I know and I feel like I'm part of the team and part of the group, but I have to be careful that I don't go outside of these boundary conditions because otherwise I might get ostracized. So if you remember maybe high school, et cetera, the in groups, et cetera, how do you stay within those groups? So that's oftentimes what we talk about when we talk about a simulation. When we're talking about belonging, when it comes down to the aspect of inclusion, this is where there's a high degree of a belongingness and there's uniqueness is valued. So Inclusion is that aspect of I can be myself, I can be my quirky, quirky self, like I like to say, and I belong. So these are those aspects where we can truly, this is when we talk about authenticity, this is when we talk about having the brave space to go and take risks, etc. This is what happens when there's a high degree of belongingness and where uniqueness is valued and celebrated. Okay, so again, a very simple but very helpful model when we're talking about a framework when it comes to belonging. And so you may ask yourself, okay, what creates belonging? So when we're really feeling a different sense of belonging, first and foremost, it's that aspect of climate, in terms of diversity of thought, fairness and equity, equal opportunity, and transparency. So here, quite a few organizations did it quite well, speaking to how transparent about, we don't know where we are right now. This is what we're working on. So here, that aspect about climate. Then the second one aspect is so important, and particularly now, is those aspects of leadership in terms of management behaviors, how decisions get made, and then how leaders are selected. So what's the talent management processes? So is there an equal opportunity? So these are those aspects around leadership. And then it comes into practices. And then practices is here, of course, how do we integrate? How do we find new employees? What are those opportunities? Is it all word of mouth, word of recommendation, or are those job postings that we see on L&D Cares, are those truly open for everybody? Here, family considerations. So here, the juggling that has been going on has been incredible when it comes to how we have been trying to navigate educating our different children at home, getting the work done, finding those different aspects as we learn to cope during the middle of a pandemic. And the last one is also this, for me, it's truly not the least. It is actually, in my opinion, one of the most important is that aspect of listening and feedback. Because particularly right now, when there is so much distraction, when there is so much anxiousness as to what will happen, what will go on, these two aspects of feedback and listening are absolutely critical when it comes to a sense of belonging and feeling like your opinion truly does matter. How does this affect our outcomes? So belonging is absolutely critical when we're looking at those aspects around job fulfillment, job satisfaction, when we're retaining, when we're looking at discretionary effort. Richard Fleming talked yesterday about it, as well as Paul Zak. Teamwork, wellness, creativity, being able to have career growth, company citizenship, as well as being willing to adopt. So this is really, belongingness is something that oftentimes gets belittled, but is so integral when it comes to having a healthy organization. Again, belonging comes back down to 4 key things: respect, responsibility, relationships, and recognition. Okay. Man, I really like this quote, and this from Rabbi Yosef Kanievsky. So every hand that we don't shake must become a phone call that we place. Every embrace that we avoid must become a verbal expression of warmth and concern. Every inch and foot that we physically place between ourselves and one another must become a thought to share that might help the other, should the need arise. So this is why when we're talking about a sense of belonging, that aspect of empathy, caring, and being proactive around how are we reaching out to one another to pick each other up. So that's why when we're looking at working remotely, being connected, all of these different things come into play around our community, our lifeline, what will happen, how are we evolving in terms of our workplace, but particularly as we look to the roles of belonging, it's really about how is my team, my tribe? That Maslow's pyramid of security really has been turned upon its head. And that it's really about listening and leaning in to truly understand what's at the heart and how can we help. So this is why for us, when we're talking about it, it's really empathy is everything. And it's when we're looking at how are we being included, And how are we being inclusive? So what are those aspects that I'm being proactive on my side to get included? And what are those aspects where I'm being proactive about saying who needs to be included here and how can we help ensure that happens? Making space for humor, I'm all down with that. Assuming positive intent and being as transparent as possible as we communicate. Oh, and lest I forget, we communicate again. So these are all absolutely critical when it comes to being able to create a sense of belonging as we are socially isolated from one another. So some recommendations. So this, I wanted to go in through a couple of recommendations as to how do we onboard ourselves as a new employee. So the first thing, and this comes back to those 4 R's, is you made a big decision. We're glad that you're here. So taking time to actually tell someone you're excited about them being here, or that you're excited about joining this team and why. Taking that time for that discussion, say, what are your expectations? And then uncovering who's involved in making those a reality. And then how can you get to know them? So also, kind of looking at your new workspace to say, okay, here, who can I tap into and how can we make that happen? 3, what are your favorite things to do at work? So as you look to yourself, and this comes back to our cohorts, what are the things that you thrive about? So this looks at, how can you get more of them and how can you do them here? So having those exploratory talks together with your manager or also your new colleagues, this is also an important aspect as you look to onboard as a new employee. The 4th question is really as you ask yourself, what are you curious about? Okay, so that you learn, so you don't get lost in the weeds. So this is something, that we like to also stress when we're looking and coaching new employees. What are the things that you're curious about? You don't have to learn everything overnight. Like I say, I always bring it back to Stephen Covey's the maturity continuum. It starts with dependence for a reason. We have to learn and to gain a foundation before we can grow. And it is oftentimes quite overwhelming. So how do we put a couple of focus areas about what are those things that we're passionate about and make sure that those are at the forefront of what we're doing as we're trying to assimilate all of this information coming at us and when we're onboarding a new employee as a new employee. But then, of course, in the same breath, if you're getting a new employee, think about it out of that same perspective. What are those things that they're curious about and how can you help them not get lost in the weeds and not get lost in the tasks of, oh, thank goodness you're here. Dump. Okay, that's what we want to avoid. Another question that comes up quite often in my practice is this aspect around what can we do to foster team cohesion and create and foster a sense of belonging when we are all working remotely. To be honest, it's really quite simple in terms of saying it, but doing it oftentimes gets a little bit more challenging. But just because it's challenging doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. So the absolute critical is how do we create an open dialogue at work, truly that it's a two-way conversation, that we start out, particularly here as leaders, how might we? Okay, so really exploratory discussions together with your team. Your team is amazing. How are you leveraging the beauty of the knowledge that is and the different personalities in the room that really will make a difference? So having these how might we sessions, really focused on those organizational values, for example, can really help prompt people to share stories about how they have felt with someone's behavior's been aligned or not aligned. Focusing on such experiences can really help build empathy, because being vulnerable, and this is that, here, I don't know if this, we've been talking about vulnerability for years, but particularly within the last 15 months, this aspect of our own vulnerability has come to the forefront and really can solidify a sense of belonging. Here, when we're looking for input, really make sure that there is the opportunity to give input, that it's not just a one and done deal. Here, this is what we're doing. Here's the mandate, just get it done. But really those aspects around creative collaboration and inclusion, being clear about how decisions get made and what decisions don't get made with only a few select team members. Okay, so this is those aspects really around transparency. Recommendations. Okay. So seriously, if we just had one slide when we're looking at how do we foster a sense of belonging within our groups, within our teams, it's really quite simple to say, how are we looking at creating an empowering structure where people can and will raise their voices, and where they will be listened to and heard, and where we as a team and group can integrate and build upon those so that it's really a constructive collaboration. Leading by example, distributing work with team input, not dictates, making time for connecting, that it's not just Zoom and gloom, and then really truly giving time in for support and understanding that different employees may need a different type of support, and understanding that you need to ask. And then for yourself, thinking about, what type of support would I need? How do I feel when I'm included? And what do I need? And how can you become a little bit more vocal, either with your organization or the people you collaborate with? Maybe you're part of L&D Cares. So thinking about, what does that support look like for you there? Because again, at the end of the day, it's really about those aspects of how are we respecting for one another, that my needs may be very different than your needs. How are we carrying the responsibility? If we commit to something, how are we helping to make it happen? Because that is also a fulfillment when I'm delivering. What is that relationship we have with one another, that it's just not coordinating work packages? Okay, sometimes it may be. But truly that we have an opportunity, and particularly this aspect of loneliness during a pandemic, the relationship aspect, it becomes so important, is we're seeing each other beyond just that simple, they're responsible for the task. Heck, you're in my guest room. So this is that aspect of what is our relationship, to then finally the fourth one, recognition for all the things that you've been accomplishing this year amidst a pandemic. So this is that aspect of taking time to stop, pause, celebrate, acknowledge, learn from, and then say, okay, what can we do here, and move on. So those are truly the four R's when it comes to belonging that really make a difference. Because at the end of the day, it's about you, it's about me, and truly it's about us as we look to staying human as we work remotely and be connected. So with that, I am Elizabeth Lembke. I have truly the passion for transformation. I am the L&D Cares Career Growth Lead, and truly it has been an honor to talk with you today. I look forward to our continued collaboration. If you'd like to get a hold of me, these are my contact details. I look forward to it and wish you all a wonderful day. Thanks, everyone.